Oh, hey, CNFers, I know I ask a lot of you. I ask for your time, and then I have the gall to ask for reviews. I mean, what an asshole. I also ask that you check out Pitch Club at welcometopitchclub.substack.com. Pitches ranging from agent queries, feature stories, and off-the-cuff unhinged essay pitches, and more. And to celebrate 1 year of Pitch Club and 1 year of The Frontrunner, I dropped my book proposal overview in there and audio annotated it, did the thing, and hope you check it out. And I'm raffling off signed copies of The Frontrunner for people who subscribe and follow the rules. Go check it out. Forever free, man. You read a little, you listen a little. You're going to learn a lot. Welcome to Pitch Club, substack.com.
It's easier to ride the lightning when you have a smaller drum kit.
Oh, hey, CNFers, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm your host for more than 13 years, Brendan O'Mara. Welcome to it. It's that Atavistian time of the month. It's a little late. I mean, the factory's running behind here at CNF Pod HQ, but we've got the first of two Atavist pods coming this month. It's Maccabee Montandon being featured for the Atavist Revived series. It's the second revived story. And this story was originally published by Gawker in 2013 and details the story of Mac's brother Asher, who was murdered in Los Angeles in the 1990s. And when I was booking Mac for the show, he had selected a date, kind of way at the end of May 24th to be exact. And I was like, oh, that's a choice. It was about 2 weeks after the piece ran, and I was like, I kind of want to get this thing going so I can publish this thing close to your publish. Whatever. That's the date you're free. That's the date we'll do it. But turns out May 24th is Mac's brother's birthday. So it was perfect, really. Show notes of this episode more at brendanomero.com. Hey. There you can read hot blogs, find out what episodes from the backlog you didn't know you were missing, and to sign up for my two very important newsletters, Pitch Club and Rage Against the Algorithm. And there's also patreon.com/CNF Pod in case you want to chip in and get access to the Flash 52 sessions and one-on-one calls with me. I'll even turn my camera off if you don't want to see my ugly, ugly mug. And you can also leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or ratings on Spotify. Like this review on Apple Podcasts. It's free. It just takes you a couple moments. Jay from Knoxville wrote, "Could it be better? No. I'm so angry. I only discovered this wonderful podcast last month. I'm a part-time author with dreams of making every sentence a joy. And what I find here is everything I want. Great advice, wisdom, and talented authors, all shepherded by O'Mara's wit and skill. You will love this podcast, and with hundreds of episodes in the can, you will find what you need." Awesome. Thank you, Jay from Knoxville. It's amazing. We can always use more of these. They help validate the enterprise for the wayward CNFer. So this episode with Mac will pair well with Alexandra Marvar's revived piece from earlier this year, among other Atavist stories and Atavist podcasts as well. But first we're going to hear from Sayward Darby, the lead editor of this revived piece. As always, visit magazine.atavist.com to read the story and consider adding it to your list of subscriptions. For $25 a year, it's the best deal in magazines. And no, I don't get commissions or kickbacks, so my recommendation comes from the heart. Riff.
I don't even know what's in my tool belt, let alone how to use it.
Yeah, I mean, what is this genre if not hybridity?
I respect that sentence.
Is that an option? Because I choose that option.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Tell me how this came to pass, how this became the second one you wanted to remaster.
Yeah, well, I think we're still deciding, right? Like, what exactly is a revived piece? Obviously, there are a million pieces out there that have been lost to internet decay and collapsing media, and we can't republish all of them. And so, what really makes sense for us? And I think there's probably I think I've said this before, it needs to be narrative. It needs to feel writerly. Like it needs to feel like an Atavist story. But I also think like things fall into kind of two categories of something reported and something more personal. And the first one that we did was reported. And I really liked the idea of finding something that was more personal that sort of fit the bill. And this was such a good example. I mean, first of all, RIP Gawker, OG Gawker, and love to be able to bring something from OG Gawker back to life. And then also just what a deeply personal story that, someone decides to tell. And that's kind of their telling, right? Like, I mean, he can tell the story as many times as he wants, but like, this is what he poured his heart and soul into to tell the story of his brother's murder. And the fact that it was no longer available was just so crappy, quite frankly. And it was a really cool piece. And he has such an interesting voice. And so I think it just made sense. And we published it. We didn't like flag this, but we published it right before what would have been Asher's birthday. And we did it as like a little mid-month bonus, just because we wanted to kind of hit that mark. And we're also kind of playing around with when do we do revived stories? Like when do we feel like one is our big monthly issue? When is it something that's a little more bonusy? Just making up words over here. But no, I was really glad when he reached out about it, because it feels like exactly the kind of thing that's like, this is a story that deserves to live. And not only because it's a good story, but because it was such a passion project for this person.
Yeah, I think when I spoke with Mac, one of the things someone at the time told him, like, oh, just make sure you save this as a PDF, just so you have it. And pretty much in the event that link rot would decay this thing into non-existence. And it's like, it's such a good exercise now for all of us to be like, if we have a story we're especially proud of, to back it up in a PDF form in the event that it's no longer available online, because we take it for granted that these things are permanent, but they are very not permanent. And with the flick of a switch, anyone can just kind of make it all go away.
Yeah, I think that's right. And he shared the PDF with me, right? Like when he pitched me, he was like, here's what I have. I have this PDF. And I think that's absolutely right. And, I obviously hope that work finds the tech gods of the world find ways to better protect work, but because they probably won't. Yes, absolutely. PDF everything. Keep a hard copy, because you just never know. And this is such a good example of a story that, again, it's not just, something I reported that I was proud of. It's like the articulation of this traumatic event in my life and like what it meant for me and my family. And like, there's something magical about that, and wanting, making sure that it, and I will also say, like, this piece, we very much kept it intact. Like, we had updated Alex's story a little bit more back in December, because it had some newsy elements to it, right? Where it was like, we kind of need to acknowledge, like, this has changed, or, politically, this has shifted. And so we used like side notes to do that. And in Mac's piece, it very much just kind of stood on its own in time. A capsule from this moment. Please, God, PDF everything.
And you brought up a moment ago, OG Gawker. For those who might not be familiar with what Gawker was in its heyday, how would you describe it?
Gawker was a blog, and Gawker was a no sacred cows kind of place, right? Like they would tell stories about anyone, everyone. They were into muckraking. They were into, exposing elites. They could push the envelope a little too much, and probably cross some lines. But there was something like scrappy and irreverent and just cool, quite frankly, about Gawker. And they also tried different stuff. Like Mac's piece, this beautiful essay about his brother's murder, is not a mean muckraking story, right? But they were sort of creating space for new voices, different ways of telling stories. And then, Peter Thiel, man, the villain of our times. That's not true. There are so many villains of our times, but he's up there on the list. Funded the lawsuit that killed him. So there's actually a good piece, I want to say in the Hollywood Reporter, because this marks 10 years this summer that OG Gawker shut down. I want to say that they quit publishing in like August of 2016 or something. There was a piece pegged to that in the Hollywood Reporter that's about the rise and fall of OG Gawker.
Mm. So when you are taking on this piece, how are you looking to maintain its core ethos, but give it that re-shining, the re-waxing, if like waxing the car?
Yeah, totally. It really largely is, like I said, a capsule story. There were a couple of, originally it had some section heads that I just didn't think quite worked. And if I recall, he had pieces of, there were like 2 chunks that were separated that we pulled together. And it just had to do with 13 years later, story was published 13 years ago, everything can be shined. And it was just like some little structural tweaks that I think gave it a slightly better flow. And, we also have the luxury of kind of doing that stuff. And again, OG Gawker, it was a blog, they were churning out so much stuff. We got to kind of sit with it and think about what little polishes and tweaks would really make it into the best version of itself. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have to sort of do any additional conversation reporting. Some of the people in the story are no longer with us. And so that wasn't really possible anyway. But we did run it through fact checking, and which was great. One of my favorite little fact checking things of all time happened, which was that Emily, the fact checker, there was this lovely line where Max said something like, the air smelled of burning charcoal and birds of paradise. And Emily, sweet fact checkers, I love them so much, flagged that birds of paradise don't have a smell.
Oh my gosh.
And which is but it's one of those things that if you're not putting something through crazy fact checking, there are birds of paradise in Los Angeles. They are very cool. You would assume they have a smell, and they don't. So anyway, we changed it to jasmine, which, does have a smell, but little things like that, where it's just if you're able to kind of go back to something and spend a little more time with it, put it through, or go through it with a fine tooth comb, you're going to find little things that just, zhuzh it up, make it all the better. That was I just love when fact checkers find stuff like that. I told her, I was in the Google Doc, I was like, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing I love when fact checkers find.
What is the challenge in sort of zhuzhing up the reissue versus one that you're really kind of crafting with the writer that is a new story? What is the editorial challenges for you, one versus the other?
I am not very good at sitting on my hands as an editor. I'm sure every writer I've ever worked with is nodding vigorously. I am a pretty heavy editor, intense, I think, line by line. And I actually really enjoy the revived process because kind of sitting on your hands is part of the project, right? We are not trying to, hey, we can make this story so much better than it used to be. That's not the point. The point is there's so many great stories out there that great writers and editors have worked on. And we just, again, it's like finding a beautiful piece of jewelry that just needs to be polished and maybe, reset in some way, or, a clasp is broken and we're just going to fix it. It's kind of putting it into its best form possible. But I will say, working on both Alex's piece and Mac's piece, at no point was I oh gosh, I would have done this so differently. Yeah. That was never the feeling. It was always, this is really good. And we're just gonna, and again, I should also say the writers want to do this, right? Because I don't know, we publish things, but are they ever really done, Brendan? Probably not. You can work on things forever. And this is kind of a chance, right? To go back and say, I did this, I was proud of it, but it can always be a little better, or here's this one thing I, forgot to say, or, in Alex's case, it was oh, I had this corrupted audio file that I finally got to work and we could include, a voice that I couldn't at the time. It's very different than putting together something from the ground up with a writer where, they come to you and we're just working on this from scratch. I think it's a really good exercise for me and for the writers, I hope. But yeah, there's definitely a sitting on the hands and realizing that it's actually really nice to sit on your hands sometimes.
Yeah.
And Revived is just a moment for if writers want to say, oh man, I really wish I'd rephrase that or whatever, like, sure, go for it, as long as it's not changing the shape or, integrity of the story.
Yeah.
Why not,
Well. That's nice. It's always nice getting Sayward's take on things. So Mac is a journalist, writer, filmmaker, all-around creative person. In this episode, we talk about obsessions and the best forms to tell stories, being creatively impulsive, patience, word economy, and sinewy strength. How the proximity to tragedy is what often activates people. Writing through grief, and his strength as a writer. Hint, he's a fast writer. A little parting shot on my desire for a reading retreat, not a writing retreat, a reading retreat. So for now, why waste time? It's like Porky the Pig. Why waste time when we can just get right to it with the Mac attack? How often did he hear that growing up? Jesus Christ, Brendan. It's Maccabee Montandon. Oh my God, if you don't have some sort of artifact of it, it's like, did it ever exist?
I know, completely. And I guess I should shout out my friend Matt Haber in San Francisco, Oakland area, because I think maybe like 5-6 years ago, the piece was still, you could like still get to it online, but he's the one who like told me to make a PDF of it, like a thing like that. I'm like a terrible Googler before I meet people. I'm like a terrible, like, I should make a PDF-er of things. So, yeah, thank goodness for Matt Haber.
I caught while reading this piece that I think your dad is from southeastern Massachusetts or lived there for a time. That's where I grew up, was southeastern Mass. So whereabouts in the Bay State?
Oh, yeah. So I tell people the name of the town and not a lot of it was Swansea, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Is that, I feel like it's somewhat central, right? Like he wasn't born there, but his parents moved there when he was pretty young. And when I was a kid, we would drive up from Baltimore at the time in like the perfect kind of like squid and whale Volvo, which might be one reason, like when I see an old Volvo now, I still get very excited. Yeah, we would drive up and go see, I think his dad was still alive when we started doing that, but in my memory, it was mostly to see his mom, who we called Little Graham, because I think she was old enough that like she had started to shrink and she didn't mind that we called her Little Graham.
Nice. Yeah.
Were you like near Swansea at all?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it might have been about a half-hour drive from where I grew up in Lakeville. And but Swansea had a pretty killer mall. So that was it was different than our Silver City Galleria in Taunton. And it was it was a bit more glitzy. So that was always a pretty special trip to go there.
That's so funny you bring that up, because like there's a few vivid memories, but one, maybe the most vivid, is there's this kid roughly my age, I think, who lived next door to my grandma there, named Corinne. And she like told me there was a wicked cool mall. And it was like the first time I'd heard that construction, wicked cool. And just like with her accent, it just was like so charming and fantastic. But yeah, she like loved that mall.
Also, yeah, like so when you're writing, or the breadth of your writing and creativity is pretty vast and a lot of different disciplines, which is like really, really cool. How do you stay motivated creatively? If you're in that kind of funk and you gotta somehow push through when you don't feel like doing anything at all.
So I think when you emailed about us talking, you mentioned like having a sort of like creative tip or something in there. I don't want to like leap ahead to that, but I do think it's sort of related to what you're asking, what I was going to talk about, but we can get more into it then. But you're right. Like I have never really had like a beat at all. Like
Mhm.
I start like most of my sort of writing life, I started out as a journalist. My first real like paid writing job was covering high school sports for a neighborhood newspaper in Berkeley, California. So I've written, and then I've just sort of had this weird sort of eclectic career, if you can call it that, in writing and journalism, and now like trying to do more kind of like script writing. And I think what I've always said, that there's only like the only unifying force around all these sort of disparate interests and pursuits, creative pursuits, I feel like is, just I get sort of obsessed about stories, and then on top of that, obsessed with like figuring out kind of like the best form for it. And while it's really, really hard these days, given the state of media and journalism, to sort of like do this professionally, we are at the same time lucky in that, there's all this technology that makes the figuring out of the right form possible, I think. So that is to say, should this be a written piece for a website? Should this be a podcast or a short film or whatever it is? I think if you have the will and a little bit of guile, you can kind of like figure out how to get a thing into the world. It also obviously helps to be sort of like middle class and in New York, because, you have some means, and having lived here since 2000, just met enough people that for like collaborative projects, if I think of an idea, there's usually very quickly after that, if I haven't thought of it with someone else, then quickly after that, I can also think like, oh, who would be a great collaborative partner on this? But I think going back to your question about staying motivated, honestly, it does connect also to the piece we're talking about, because I was like a pretty bad student in high school and pretty unmotivated. And as I say in the piece, like pretty kind of like somewhat aimless and drifting even into my mid 20s, I would say. But I do think after my brother was killed so young, that, not immediately, because there's like the shock and grief to get through, of course, but like not long after that, within a few years, I would say, it really like became this motivating force of like, holy shit, like it can all just end very quickly. So if you have an idea, you better get on it, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. And I do think like that has stayed with me. And, I think like being sort of like impulsive in that way, it's good in some ways. It also makes me like kind of impatient and not always, which is not always conducive to like a creative project. But I think like on the good side, I am like highly motivated. If I have an idea, I'm into to like figure out quickly like how to pursue it,
Yeah, that patience is so key, but there's also that tension of like, well, you don't have forever, even just from a actuarially kind of point of view through life insurance. But to your point, like your brother was just tragically murdered in the 90s. It's like, yeah, you do have to balance. We got to do things as fast as possible, but also marry it with the patience that this is a long game too in the creative fields.
For sure. In obituaries, I always like take note of the age, and it's another sort of like reminder that like the clock's ticking for sure. But yeah, I'm trying to like reconcile those two impulses, to like go, and also realize that. So for example, it took many years, but out of the piece about my brother, I wrote like a short novel that's covers some similar ground, a very, very like fictionalized account, or maybe just one very fictionalized account of some similar time in my life and circumstances. It essentially takes place like the year before the murder, the year of the murder, and the year after. So it's 3 successive years in 3 different cities. So some of the details and time is compressed and altered, of course. But so that is maybe get like the most urgent sort of like lesson being patient and, waiting for feedback and trying to get an agent with it and waiting to hear back from agents and all this stuff. And then, so I'm deep in the like negotiating of patience moment, and hoping to get better at it.
Yeah. And so this piece originally ran in 2013 in Gawker. So when you revisited the piece, like what did that reveal about the writer you were 13 years ago versus, who you've become since?
Wow. That's like, I need to think for a second. I mean, I think in some ways, truly, like there may be a kind of before and after, at least like stylistically. And I have to say, like, you read these stories about, how like, not that I'm comparing myself to any of these people, but like Raymond Carver's editor, you hear about just like how editors sort of, or like with James Ellroy, I think like his agent or editor, really like helped shape what became known as like the Ellroy style, right? And I have to say, like, with the Gawker story, the editors, I think, really, like, I think before that, I probably still do it too much. Just I'm kind of guilty of overwriting a lot. And I think it was mostly this guy, Tom Skoka, edited the piece most closely. And I think he was like really very good for the piece and for me, just in terms of like getting the economy in there and, cutting through a lot of my overwriting. And I've tried to like keep that lesson and style in mind now and just recognize like, in just simplistic terms, kind of like brevity and shorter sentences and how sort of like more impactful they can be. Obviously, like it's sort of the story in some ways dictates to you like how it should be written, I think. But before the piece came out, I was just drawn to like much more kind of like windy, opaque kind of constructions. And now I feel like I see the power of brevity and clarity.
I think of how, sometimes early on in a career, you want more of that flourish and a bit overwritten. And people who've listened to the show long know that my favorite band is Metallica. And early on, like Lars's drum kit was obnoxiously large. But then as he transitioned into the 90s and to today, he went from like 4 mounted toms to 2. And he still has the double kick, of course, but everything leaned down and it was more about that punctuation and a certain leanness. But that comes through age and realizing like, oh, I don't need to be so virtuosic. I just need to be in service of the song and the storytelling. And there's a lot of lessons right there to unpack as a writer.
No, totally. I didn't know that about Lars, but I love that. And as you were talking, my mind was making a dumb joke about how like it's easier to ride the lightning when you have a smaller drum kit. Just, but yeah, I think it's interesting because when you think about like power and strength, like maybe your first images are of like, some bulked up organism or whatever, but like, then there's like that kind of like sinewy strength that you see in like middleweight fighters, like Roberto Duran comes to mind as like the epitome of like a super powerful sinewy guy, right? And so I think that's kind of what we're talking about too. Is just there's different forms of power, right? And yeah, like a sinewy like economy is kind of really seductive to me now. I'm really into like 90-minute movies that like I think for a while movies were getting to be like 4 or 5 hours, whatever. And yeah, so I just started to really appreciate where like every moment and beat like really just was, made sense for the piece and it was trimmed down to its essence.
Yeah, it's like if you're gonna pay $20 for a movie ticket, they're probably justifying like to pay $20 for a 90-minute movie, even though the labor is significant to tell a very lean story. Like I think of Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel. It's like 90 minutes. It's just like a wonderful movie, lean, propulsive. But if you're going to pay that $20, it's like, well, I guess I'd rather be here for 2 or 2.5 hours because I feel like I'm getting more of my money's worth.
Yeah. No, that's true too. It is funny, like what sort of the thing we go through in terms of like the value of whatever, and like, yeah, is a double album like worth more than like a single perfect album or whatever? Yeah, I don't know. But I'm definitely like drawn to, like 200-page novels. I mean, that also might be a function of being older and having less like attention span, but I'm sort of drawn to those just sort of leaner stories these days.
Yeah, so at the start in the kind of this author's note of your Atavist piece, or the the Gawker piece, reimagined, remastered, for Atavist, we hear about the shootings that grab headlines, but what about those that don't? And your brother's shooting was one of those that didn't. And I love that sort of central question and that you examine in the piece. So just take us to that moment of like, yeah, this was one of the probably thousands of shootings a year that don't make those headlines.
It's hard to like sort of like get back to the mind of thinking about when I first started working on it, but I will say, like, when I look back on it in the climate we're in now, and I think I talk about it in the author's note too, how like, if anything, gun violence has only gotten worse since that piece was published. But it does hit me every time, like there's a shooting. I hesitate to use the word mass shooting because I feel like it's so, I don't know, divisive and distracting. But anytime there's a shooting that does sort of like pull the attention of the country in one direction, it's just so frustrating and infuriating that it takes that A, for like anyone to pay attention, and then B, how quickly that attention goes away. And I'm not blaming like the average person. It's more like the people who have actual power who could attempt some kind of change legislatively or otherwise. So yes, I think like occasionally there'll be like an incident where, there's like someone, a politician or someone in power in a position to enact change, that the phenomenon of gun violence like gets close to their life and suddenly they're like motivated to act. So I think like it was looking at sort of all those dynamics and sort of hoping, probably naively, that if I could create like a very intimate portrait of a person who was killed by a gun at a way too young age, that maybe it would have that same effect that I was just talking about, where like, if someone is in proximity to a tragedy, suddenly they care much more about that tragedy. So I think like that is sort of part of what motivated me for sure, was to like give that feeling of like, obviously most people who read the piece like didn't know my brother, but I wanted them to get to know him and to sort of like understand in an intimate, deep way just how like one death and tragedy sort of like ripples out and affects a community.
And for a lot of people who write in nonfiction and personal stories, often grief is a motivating and animating force to a text, or certainly brings people to the page to maybe metabolize it in a certain way. In what way, or maybe even what counsel could you give somebody who is writing through a grievous event?
I mean, I guess what I'd say, and again, sorry to keep going back to the author's note, but I said a similar thing there. I think that for me, it was like intensely therapeutic to do it. I guess like I for sure understand if, it would appear way too painful to someone to like really sit and sort of grapple with the feelings and memories of the terrible event. But I guess what I'd say is, in my case at least, it was sort of like worth the struggle and pain, because it did feel incredibly cathartic to like, get the story out down on the page first and then like out in the world. And I think I can say pretty confidently like that piece like got, for me, like the most, in terms of volume, but also like in terms of intensity, like the most response of anything, pretty much anything I've like worked on in my kind of professional life. And I think part of that is because a lot of readers sort of like could it came through to them, the intensity I was experiencing while working on it. So especially to like writers, I would say, I feel like, you might be surprised just how grappling with it on the page, like what that sort of does both for you, spiritually and psychologically, but also just in terms of the work, because it is not just such a personal story, but such a visceral story, and with so much drama, right? Like, and so going into it, you have these narrative advantages of intensity and stakes and drama. So I think you're like sort of set up, if you can get through the hard part of it, to like create something pretty special.
And what was the experience of writing this piece? Sometimes these things can come out like a fever dream, and other times it can be like real labor to forge it. So what was the experience of composing and generating this piece like for you?
I think it was sort of like both of those things, in part because there was some difficult reporting work to be done. So that, and this was, I guess like the internet was very helpful back then still, but it was, some of the reporting just took a while. So there was that aspect. And so at times I wouldn't like have enough information to really like do the actual writing. But in terms of the writing, I don't have a lot of great qualities, but one of them is like, I'm a pretty fast writer. I remember that being true with this too. Like once I do like all the reporting. Like I really want a full sense of the story before I even like start, so I don't really start writing until I have the full story in mind, and to get that with, a piece like this, that required a bunch of reporting too. So yeah, I think that was what took most of the time, was just doing the reporting. And then once I had all of the pieces, I don't remember the writing happening that fast. Can't remember exactly like how long. I think the piece ended up being about 8,000 words. And I know we wanted to like try to publish it around, like not too far away from my brother's birthday, which, as it happens, is today. And
no kidding.
And when you sent me your calendar and I saw May 24th was available, I jumped on it. I thought it would be a good day for us to talk.
Oh, that's
it's
amazing.
also Bob Dylan's birthday. Billy and his wife Tin, if you're listening, it's all these wonderful people's birthday.
Oh my gosh. Well, it being your brother's birthday, what what does that stir up in you on a day like this?
Well, it's it's always somewhat weighty, but also that's like he was so full of life, and sorry, that's like a hackneyed expression, but he loved to party, he loved people, he loved life, and so I feel like it's just a disservice to his memory to mope around all day, even if that's what I want to do, especially on a gray, rainy day in Brooklyn. But yeah, so it's usually kind of a combo of pushing aside the heaviness and doing something both fun and that I think he'd be into, whether that's listening to Miles Davis or Led Zeppelin or going and seeing a Kurosawa or Mel Brooks movie, or any movie for that matter. Like he was pretty Catholic with his taste. Yeah, so that's kind of the day. It's also, this one's a little weird, especially because my wife and our two kids the two kids are college age, so they're not around that much anyway, but they're all like sort of dispersed around Europe at this moment.
Oh, wow.
And I'm solo in the apartment with the dog and the cat, and it's raining and I'm drinking tea. And so it's like, it's its own unique experience of May 24th this year. But my plan is to, yes, listen to some Led Zeppelin and maybe like go have a nice meal and like cook some tequila at some point.
Oh, that's a great, it's a great way to honor the spirit of your brother. All these years later, to be able to lean into things that lit up his taste and to, kind of keep that spirit alive.
For sure. And like, I mean, those are some of my earliest memories, was just him, I guess saying impart his taste is the nice way. I mean, like a lot of older siblings, he was very adamant that, I must listen to combat rock right now, and I must watch this or listen to the Steve Martin stand-up cassette. So yeah, I mean, that was definitely like an early part of our dynamic, right? It was him imposing in a good way his sort of like taste on me. So I agree completely. Like that seems appropriate to go back to that somehow today.
Yeah, and it must have been. I mean, I imagine maybe it was part of the discussions, but the fact that this piece was able to come back up to the surface, and in the birth month of your brother, that must have been like a kind of a creative decision and a nod to his life as well, or maybe it's coincidence. I don't know.
It's funny, Brandon, because like I was looking back at the emails. I think I wrote to the Atavist. I think I first wrote them like January or February. I think it was January. I know it was cold, and yeah, just had just seen like for the first time that I'm talking about this series, and got really excited. And then I wasn't sure, like what their plans were, how often they were going to publish the pieces, and when. But then as we were moving along, and it seemed like the calendar was lining up, I did mention it to my editor there, and she thought it was a good idea to like get it out around May 24th as well.
When you're composing the piece or even reporting the piece, some you can get really bogged down in research and reporting. Like, I just want to make one more call, 2 more calls, 10 more calls, or go to another archive and so forth. Well, whatever it might be, and then we can kind of really kick that writing can down the road. So, just like for you, and maybe with this piece in particular, like when did you know you were ready to sit with it and start writing?
Yeah, I think with this one, I totally hear you on like almost every other story. It's like really hard to know when you're done reporting, and maybe like you never are, because even after you publish, like then people will come out and tell you new things or whatever. I think that happens a lot with like investigative reporting, or like news sources, now that they see the information's out there, right? Like news sources feel more comfortable talking about it. But with this one, if I remember right, it was pretty much like around the police report and talking to, which I hadn't seen before, starting to work on this, and like talking to folks at LAPD, a detective there. In my memory, that was like kind of the last piece that I think like I wanted to know as much as I could outside of that before like going to that conversation, so I would know sort of like what I wanted to and needed to find out. Yeah, so I think that was always sort of like the finish line of reporting for me when I look back on it. So this was, which was like uncommon in my experience, to sort of know the work is like, the reporting work is like leading up to that sort of final conversation or two with the detective there.
Yeah, and with this piece too, and in general, but specifically here, like how are you thinking about the structure of it and the pacing of it?
To be honest, I wrote probably like a fairly messy, more sprawling draft of it, and then again, like all props to the editors who have imposed more, I would say, pacing and structure on it. I can't remember now. So one difference between the original piece from 2013 and the remastered edition is, in the first piece, it was more explicitly structured around, I think I said early in the piece, like, exploring something about like the ripple effects of the grief, right? And so that was more explicitly structured, where you would go, person by person and have sections for each one. So like the dad section, my mom's section, Catherine, my wife's section, etc. And so that was back then, like seemed like a kind of neat structural idea to sort of rein in this story that could get sprawling sprawling, if not for imposing structure. And then, but re-looking at it, and again, like props to my new editor, who, like, looking back at it now, was like, it's sort of already implicit in there without making it, like, you don't have to make it as explicit as that. This piece just naturally sort of like flows in that direction. So I think it still probably like reads the same, just like you wouldn't know unless you knew that there was any, like section headers before. But yeah, I think truly that was like editors taking a kind of like sprawling first draft and just chiseling it down a bit and like imposing a neater, cleaner structure on it.
And later in the piece, too, you write about, but for many years I'd felt a toxic wad of gut-based guilt. It's just a great starter to a sentence there. Because I didn't feel like I felt, because I didn't think I felt enough. I thought I should be sadder. I thought I should be undone. I thought, like a Beckett character, that I should not be able to go on and that I shouldn't. Take us to that tension there of, what you were feeling and how you so beautifully articulate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is also going back to what I was saying about, how I kind of like to deal with or go through May 24th every year. Like, again, my brother just would not. He was not a punch puller. I talk in the piece about his film he made as a senior in high school called Punk Rules, and how that was just eviscerated our headmaster at our we were like scholarship kids at this pretty posh like prep school outside of Baltimore. So for his senior project, he made this film, and it just tore apart like the actual school's headmaster and like everyone who watched it in assembly. It was a fictional piece, but they knew. I mentioned all that just to say, like, this couldn't be hagiography. Like, my brother would have like rolled his eyes in his grave so hard if I just written something that didn't feel complicated and truthful, I guess. And so yeah, I just really needed to sort of examine in a true way like all the different thoughts and feelings. And I think if we're honest, like all sibling relationships are can be complicated, right? And does that mean? I mean, it doesn't diminish like the love I felt for him. I think if anything, like those kinds of complicated relationships, there can be like a deeper love. But I just knew that if I was going to do this, it needed to be like as truthful as I could make it, and not sand away like the edges. And it's true to my experience that both growing up and later in life, there were times where like he really fucking drove me crazy, right? And like I just couldn't kind of like deal with him, and so I think that had to be in there a little bit. And also, to speaking to the section you just read, and it's interesting because like I've heard from people who've read it and like sort of expressed similar things where you can't like control your reaction to a thing, right? And like we're sort of expected to just be completely undone by these things, and there are times where one is completely undone by them, but there's also times where you're sort of like weirdly okay, and I think it's okay to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for a lot of people, be it filmmakers or writers, podcasters, it can be really hard to either read your old work, watch your old movies, listen to old interviews, or listen to old podcasts. And we kind of alluded to it at the start of our conversation, but what was the experience of reconfronting the text, or maybe the apprehension, just knowing that you've gotten 13 years more experience under your belt? Like, might have handled that a little differently or whatever. Like, that's a little cringe or whatever the case may be. Like, so what was the sense of apprehension going into confronting an older text?
A really good question. I mean, truthfully, there wasn't a ton. I hadn't read it that much since it came out, honestly, but I guess I wasn't that apprehensive just because because, like I was saying before, like the response to it was so overwhelmingly positive. I mean, yeah, it was the only time in my life like a lot of strangers just got in touch to say like how moved they were and how much they liked it. So I sort of like remembered that and trusted that if that was the case, it wouldn't be too terribly cringy to go back and look at. And, you know, even though it's 13 years ago, I was still in my 40s, you know, when I wrote it. I think if I was, you know, if I had been in like my 20s or 30s, maybe there would have been more apprehension. I was like a fairly formed human by the point, you know, when I first wrote it and published it. So yeah, I mean obviously Sally Rooney was in her 20s and writing some of the best novels of you know, contemporary times. So that's not to say you can't be a brilliant 20 something, but I think you know what I mean, where it's like I've definitely like gone back and looked at some very early writing, and it ain't good, my friend. It is not good at all. So that's actually poetry. So I think you know, that makes sense. But yeah, with this one, I was pretty sure, and then rereading it, I don't remember like too much. It's interesting. There was one comment on Reddit about someone saw it, the new version, and they were like, it's good, but like overly styled and needed an editor or something. And I was like, I can see that. Like, I think like maybe if I could go back in time, I might like lean slightly away from the sort of like, it does read at times, you know, somewhat like kind of like hard boiled noirish stylistically. So maybe I might go back in time and like alter that slightly, but overall, like I think it still reads really well.
Yeah, and it came out very close to the Sandy Hook shootings, and so that's the ecosystem that this was, you know, published, and now here we are at this point. So I suspect the reaction you might have gotten around that time was still in that environment ecosystem, and now we're, you know, sometime later. So what has been, or what's the expectations of the reaction you've been, you know, expect to get versus, you know, and what is some of the reaction you're getting so far since the piece you know, came out very recently?
Honestly, like it's sort of interesting to see it because the distribution of it now is kind of like pretty significantly different. By that I mean like it ran on Gawker. It was before they were sort of like embroiled in all the mishigas that ultimately like led to their demise. So it's like still fairly at like the peak of its powers and popularity, and so, you know, and had this like very engaged readership. So it was just seen by, you sort of knew immediately, like I think they even had like a number on their pieces and you could see who was reading, how many people were reading it. So like it was very like immediate and fast and widespread, the response. This feels now a little like more of like a slow burn effect, I think. You know, I mean, I have no idea like how many people or who has seen it. Most of the feedback I've gotten so far, and I guess it's only been out like a little over a week, but most of the feedback has just been more personal, from people I know who had not seen it the first time, so they're like reading it for the first time now, including, you know, like some people who went to our high school who knew both of us growing up. So that's been really meaningful, honestly, like just sort of, you know, this is mostly like people I'm distantly connected to, maybe on Instagram or whatever, who have just sent some touching and lovely notes. It's been, yeah, just much more kind of like personal messages versus like a real sort of like, yeah, it was sort of, I'd never experienced that before or since in 2013, just like who, you know, I knew Gawker was like popular or whatever, but like just the reach of it was sort of crazy, I think, for me anyway. So it was like pretty different experience.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Well, Mac, at the end of these conversations, I always love asking the guest for a recommendation of some kind. That's just like anything for the listeners that you just want to recommend. It can be just anything that's that's kind of fun and exciting that you want to share. And so I would just pose that to you.
Can it be a few things?
Oh, of course. Yeah. More the merrier.
Well, I've been thinking, and maybe because I'm like pretty solidly in middle age now, I've been like really appreciating, let's just call them older artists who are like making what I think is pretty dynamic and great art still. And one album I'm into is the new Kim Gordon record. It's great driving around music. I think I first started listening to it, I was in LA for a few days and like listening to it there and like driving around, and it like was a great soundtrack for the city. So, and also like I love seeing sort of models for aging. Like I used to joke about like wanting to sort of age like a Bill Murray character, but now it's like less of a joke. I'm like, that seems pretty great. But, like I love seeing these like great artists like be models for sort of aging and still creating. And then the other thing that came to mind was the movie Seurat, which I don't want to give too much away, but is, if you have the chance to see it in a theater, like I'm actually not going to say that much about it, just go see this movie in a theater. It's I think it was a Spanish company that made it, but a French director. It takes place in like the Moroccan desert, and that's all I'm going to say. Just try to see it in the theater. It's SIRAT. My friend Carl recommended it to me, and I find like he saw it in Europe, and then I finally had the chance. Catherine, my wife, and I saw it in Brooklyn in the theater maybe like a couple months ago, and it's really hard to describe, but just go see it.
Oh, amazing. Well, Mac, I'm so glad we got to have this conversation and talk about your talk about this amazing piece that is remastered for the Atavist, and to get to talk on your brother Asher's birthday, which I think adds extra significance and poignance to your piece and to our conversation. So just thanks so much for coming on the show and talking shop and sharing the backstory to the story and nuts and bolts of it as well. So thank you.
Man, thank you so much. Yeah, I really love chatting with you, and it's funny because you asked about apprehension before, and honestly, like it's almost harder. It was like harder to talk about this, I think, both the piece and the event than to write it, and in a way. So thanks for forcing me. I'm glad you did, and yeah, it's just really nice. Thanks.
Awesome. Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Sayward and Mac. And make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and Pitch Club at welcometopitchclub.substack.com. And if you care for the social media thing, Instagram handles at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. YouTube channel is at Creative Nonfiction Podcast if you want to get those This American Life. That's right, This American Life videos. I just fuck around for fun. I like them. It is fun to vlog. I'm like a vlogger now. While I was driving, I was thinking of all the books I need to read for the podcast, and even some novels I just want to read but don't have the bandwidth to sit with. And then I can put them in my little free library and be done with them. Yeah, my eyes can only take so many thousands of words per day, you know. Many of us fantasize about a writing retreat where we get to sit alone in a cabin in the woods and work on a thing. But what I'd give... My gosh, what I'd give to have a reading retreat where I'm free from distraction and I can bring 5 books with me and bang them out. Read for 30 minutes, take a nap, go for a walk, read for an hour, lie on the floor. No other tasks, no other work, no other chores. Just eat and read and nap. I guess I just need some sleep, you know, and a bunch of non-alcoholic drinks. The booze, man, I think it's slowly killing me. So it's beer week here in Eugene, and there are these bingo cards to visit as many breweries or tap houses as you can. Extra points for bingo. And being the maladaptive copers that we are, we went on a mini Tuesday pub crawl to get bingo, and it was a stupid thing to do on a Tuesday night. Miraculously, I didn't have what you would call my signature crushing headache, but I did sleep like shit. And my motivation to do anything constructive the day after I even get like a whiff of beer is next to nothing. Like I was supposed to have a nice tempo run today, and I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen. And that's a direct result of the sloth induced by having too much beer. So I mainly walk through the world with a lot of shame around it. It's bad for my health. It's bad for my wife's healing after her surgery. And yet we so often find ourselves unable to find other means of having fun. Everything's so boring without a moderate beer buzz. But I know future Brendan, which is to say Saturday and Sunday morning Brendans, never regret not drinking the night before. But we love breweries. I love being at breweries. But having kombucha or non-alcoholics anything at a brewery just doesn't hit the same way. So in the moment, Brendan often loves hanging out at a brewery for 2 beers or more, or sipping on a beer at baseball games. That last one's a little easier to say no to because at $13.50, it's obscene for a 20-ounce pour, and after tip, 1 round is like $30 for 40 ounces of booze. Anyway, I suspect there are others who have a weird relationship to booze. Like if you don't drink, you can come across as like a teetotaling stick in the mud. But there's a financial, physical, and mental cost to drinking that I'm increasingly finding untenable. I go through these phases every 2 to 3 months, or maybe 2 to 3 times a year is more accurate. And that's where I'll back off for a month or 2 months, sometimes 3, and like not have anything and feel kind of good and rejuvenated. But then I always come back like the incredibly drunk Hulk. Like I don't know how to have fun without altering my consciousness a little bit, or a lot of it. But I love being able to wake early on a Saturday, journal, read, get my coffee, go for maybe a long run, and feel like I'm honoring my physical and mental self. I don't know if this is actually low-grade alcoholism or boredom or both. It'd be nice to have that reading retreat, almost like going to rehab, to change contexts, to clear the mind, to stop the hustle, to rejuvenate. I don't know, man. It's just where I'm at on a Wednesday at 12:04 as I track this tape. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do interview, see ya.